Welcome to Second Take, the show that focuses on the issues behind the news. This week, government released its climate change policy document. Terence joins me to discuss the implications for South Africa and especially the business community. Terence, welcome to Second Take. What did the white paper say about South Africa's response to the threat of climate change?
I think the white paper lays out the fact that there is this threat. It does away with all the naysayers that don't believe in climate change and are sceptical of it. It says there is a threat. We are already seeing some of those consequences in South Africa and in the extreme weather events around the world, and that South Africa needs to put in place a response. And I think that basically it's a very pragmatic plan. It tries to balance the imperatives for job creation and job preservation in the traditional sectors of the economy and also those energy intensive sectors of the economy. It recognises the energy intensity and the nature of the South African economy as being energy intensive. And it also seeks to say we need to put in plans to make a response to the inevitable effects of climate change on South Africa, which they say are already starting to appear. And the other element that they want to emphasize through this climate policy is that we want to make a fair contribution to the global effort to reduce climate changing emissions, greenhouse gas emissions. Now, I think that's where a lot of the debate is going to centre. Our policy through this white paper says that we have a peak, plateau, and then decline trajectory for our emissions, and that's really an issue of trying to peak at between 400 and 600 megatons between 2020 and 2025, and then staying at that level till about 2035 for a decade, and then seeking to decline from about 2036 onwards our greenhouse gas emissions to around a level between 200 megatons and 420 megatons by 2050. So that's the sort of pattern that government lays out in the white paper and previously has sort of outlined both locally and in the commitments it's made at places like Copenhagen a few years ago. So there's going to be a debate about the fairness of that. Now, business will say this is going to be a hard task and we might need more space and time to meet that task. And in fact, what the policy does is it creates quite a lot of space, relative what to some observers probably would have wanted for business to start making the contingency plans through carbon budgeting. So there's going to be a 2-year process from when this document is finally approved to actually come up with your carbon budget, especially in those carbon intensive or carbon heavy sectors of the economy such as energy and transport. And the fairness debate from the environmental side is going to say, well, is this peak, plateau and decline trajectory ambitious enough? Is it really a fair contribution to South Africa's effort and the global effort to try and ensure that temperatures don't rise above that 2 degrees centigrade level above pre-industrial levels, which is seen as the tipping point for massive changes in the climate? So I think it's a pragmatic document. Business will, I think, be fairly happy with the pragmatism. I think that there will be some discussion around from the environmental communities and lobby groups as to whether this is a fair contribution from a country that is going to be hosting COP17 next month and in December, and is actually taking over the presidency of those climate negotiations and the leadership, because they will say, if everyone goes with a policy like this, there's no chance that we'll meet our targets as the globe. It does put a lot more emphasis on the need for industrial countries to really come to the plate and reduce their emissions. And I think that asymmetry has always been part of the South African policy plan. And I think that they're going to say, yes, industrial countries don't only have to do more in terms of cutting their emissions, but also need to help finance our cuts. So it's going to be a ding-dong battle, as always, in Durban later this year. But I think the environmental groups will be slightly unhappy with what has come out in this policy, and I think business will be somewhat pleased with how it's framed.
While giving space to prepare for the transition to a carbon-constrained world, are there any immediate responses planned?
Yeah, the carbon policy or the white paper also outlines a number of flagship projects, which are basically interim measures while we come up with our big plans, the energy and transport, especially the energy sector, coming up with those big plans to reduce emissions from the likes of Sasol and Eskom and others. There's these flagship projects which can help probably on the margins, things like demand side management, energy efficiency programs, rolling those out in a massive way. So we see the big solar geyser program. We want to roll out 1 million by 2014. And that is gaining some traction, the changing towards energy efficient light bulbs. But there are a number of other flagship programs, including the big IPP tender for renewable energy, which is currently out. And in fact, the responses should be in on 4th of November, which is coming quite soon. And that will be a big change in terms of our energy mix if we can get that 3,700 type megawatts of capacity coming into South Africa's energy mix. And a number of other initiatives around, for instance, working for water, taking out alien vegetation, and a number of other public works type projects where jobs can be created and there can be some element of either mitigation of carbon emissions or adaptation programs starting to take shape.
Emphasis is also now being given to the potential benefits of South Africa's response plan. Can you reflect on any of these spin-offs?
Yes, I think I mentioned two of those. The jobs potential around some of the public works aspects of what people are talking about ecological infrastructure. So you've got sort of green infrastructure would be like the wind farms and the solar farms, and you have the traditional infrastructure like railway lines and dams and roads. And there's talk now about this ecological infrastructure and actually putting a value to this ecological infrastructure, having greater visibility of ecological infrastructure such as wetlands and coastal vegetation, which both of which are vital in terms of sustaining livelihoods, keeping people healthy, purifying the water, preventing flooding and silting, preventing sea surges from taking out coastal communities. All of those sort of things that might get worse under the context of climate change. Actually saying that there's actually jobs to be had in this sort of green, not just green economy or green infrastructure, but this ecological infrastructure in maintaining it and sustaining it or rehabilitating it. So for instance, do we allow the grasslands to become savannas, which is happening naturally as the climate warms? More trees come into the grasslands, which provide carbon sinks, but they also suck up the water, and there's all sorts of other things. Or do we use this as an opportunity to deploy a lot of people to take out that vegetation, much of it which would be alien vegetation, and use that in a different way to employ people and actually to make products, even use it in the energy space to make to actually burn it in some ways to as part of the along with coal or other processes which is sometimes lower carbon. So there's seen that there is potential to use South Africa's biodiversity and ecological infrastructure to create jobs. So it's not all downside. Then I also mentioned this whole rollout of green industries, so solar water geysers, energy efficient light bulbs. You can put quite a lot of people to work if you can start retrofitting our buildings with better lighting solutions, if you can have solar water geysers going up, if people can start putting up rooftop photovoltaic solutions. So what we saw this week is IDC has come up with 500 million rand to help such energy efficiency programs, not just for changing the light bulbs and putting in the solar geysers, but if you can show that you can self-generate. At the moment we don't have a way of actually feeding into the grid from these small units. But if you can put in a rooftop solar and you can self-generate, they will also fund those sort of programs. So and there's jobs and there's savings and there's efficiency savings that can be generated around that. And plus it makes a lot of these export industries a lot more less carbon heavy. And there is talk, about carbon penalties on your products in future if you don't make some sort of adaptation or mitigation moves, especially mitigation moves. There might be labeling that stops people in Europe or other North America from buying or add a tax at the border. So there's a whole push to start looking at as we move to mitigate and adapt to climate change, to both do green industry, to develop new green industries such as the solar farms, such as the wind farms, such as these solar water geysers, but also this opportunity to take a landscape view across our infrastructure. So we need engineered infrastructure, and we need to scale that up. And we need green infrastructure to be integrated where possible, but also there's ecological infrastructure that should be rehabilitated and maintained. And there's actually quite a lot of jobs potential within that. So I think there's this holistic thinking that's emerging from South Africans, not only government, I think pushed by civil society and new thinking and entrepreneurship. But I think there's this more holistic view of how we manage this big climate change crisis, not just seeing it as a threat, but actually seeing it as an opportunity, especially for job creation.
Terence, thank you very much. That is the Second Take show for this week. Thank you for watching, and join us again next time for more news analysis.